Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talk with Milo Beyene, the new director of communications at Jewish Community Action. We talk about what brought them to this new position, their relatively new Jewish journey, and connecting their Judaism to social justice on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But before we get started with Milo, be sure to check out some of the other podcasts that Jewfolk produces, like The Jews Are Tired, where Lev Gringos is taking a deep dive into Jewish news. Kumba Hineni, Jewfolk's podcast on intersectionality with host Enzi Tanner, and Not Your Bubby's Nosh, Jewfolk's rebranded food podcast with Micah Siva. Go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast to learn more. Milo Beyene, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Milo, you are the new communications director for Jewish Community Action. You've been in the role for a little more than a month now. What's that month been like? Sort of that introduction process to the organization and the JCA community.
Oh, it's been fantastic. During my first week, I had the opportunity to work very closely with my predecessor, Jonathan Gershberg. And, we sort of really dug into the weeds. He gave me a tour of sort of our back-end systems that we use at JCA, introduced me to staff members that I wasn't already familiar with, and really gave me, sort of a vision of what he wanted to do with comms in the future. And that really energized me, in my work currently. But yeah, since Jonathan left, I've been connecting with members as part of our Give to the Max Day, as part of just general events that we've hosted. As Jonathan was leaving, we had a Goodbye Jonathan and Hello Milo sort of pre-Shabbat Nosh event that was really fun. And yeah, I've been really lucky to learn under him and learn from the wonderful organizers that are here. Yeah, so that's sort of a brief summary of my first month. I've also, outside of JCA, connected with our coalition partners, for example, at Home to Stay and the Decriminalizing Communities Coalition. They have wonderful organizers and wonderful communications directors as well. So I've got to hear from them and sort of plan out what it looks like post-election. That was really intense to have in my first month as comms director. I really, like I said, dove into it sort of head first. It was really exciting. And I think I did well. I hope I did well. I suppose the listeners can let me know.
Well, and I was hoping to make it to the Meet Milo Goodbye Jonathan party, and I was at the tail end of my week with COVID, unfortunately, so I was not able to make it. I would have enjoyed, meeting you in person. I'm not sure anybody would have enjoyed seeing me in person that week, but. Oh,
yeah. I remember the first time I got COVID, I was an absolute wreck. And so I hope that when you had COVID, it was your first and only time. It's no fun.
No, it's not. It was first and only, and got on the medicine pretty quickly that made everything taste like metal, which name I've completely forgotten, fortunately, because I don't want to have to go through that again. It was pretty terrible. But it's happy to have had it once and gotten over it and come out the other side fine, but also would be happy to never have to deal with that again. So you mentioned the coalition partners. You mentioned starting in really the tail end of election season. And fortunately, Jonathan was there for a piece of that to sort of help you wade in a little bit slower maybe than you otherwise might have had to without him there. Mm-hmm. But what was sort of working with the coalitions this year that JCA does so much great work with? How much of that, obviously last year there was ballot initiatives that that directly impacted some of the coalition partners like Home to Stay, like the decriminalizing communities. This year, there weren't those initiatives on the ballot. Did that sort of change the nature of the relationship at all, or did it only enhance it because the stakes seem to go up each election?
I mean, I don't necessarily have the context of working at JCA during that time, but that said, I would still say that our relationships are very strong and there's still a lot of work to go. Right now, you mentioned Home to Stay, what we're doing is there's a working group that is basically slated to come up with recommendations on various housing policies. And, we're thinking about what does it look like when this working group goes to city council with their recommendations, and how can we, have messaging around that event, perhaps hold a press conference. And so the relationships are still definitely strong, but again, I can't compare to the sort of what the past was like because I wasn't in this position necessarily.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, and that makes sense. So going back a little bit, what was it about either this opportunity or JCA in general that interested you in this position?
What a great question. I was already familiar with JCA as just a community member. And I remember meeting up with Ian, who's the JCA housing organizer, at a few events. I think, perhaps one of the first things we did together was there was a Home to Stay press conference, and he was looking for a speaker. And housing justice is something that is very personal to me. It's something that I care very deeply about. So we just hopped on Zoom and sort of talked about what this press conference would look like. We went back and forth on what I would say. And I don't know, I really loved working with him. And then I had heard from Tova, who's our congregation organizer, that there was a position about to come up for the communications manager. And so, knowing Ian, knowing Tova, I want to say perhaps a year prior, I had connected with Brandon, who's our combating hate organizer, as part of his anti-Semitism trainings, which are wonderful, by the way. If people haven't gone, they should absolutely go. He's so knowledgeable and is very happy to stay on later and talk for 1 or 2 hours if you have questions. That's what we did. Just the people at JCA are fantastic, are so smart, are so passionate about their work. I knew that I wanted to join that. I don't have any history in communications, but I am somebody that deeply cares about social justice, and that definitely motivated me, and also social justice specifically rooted in Jewish values was something that I wanted to be a part of. And so I applied and I got the job. So here I am.
You mentioned that your Judaism is very much rooted in social justice. Where did that come from for you?
Well, I would say that social justice is a value that I've had since, I was a child. I remember, well, there are 2 anecdotes I'd like to share. The first one is I remember my older brother had a PlayStation 2, and he would play it all the time while me and my sister would just watch him play. But, there was a random Saturday night that my sister and I looked at each other and said, like, we want to be able to play too. It's not fair that we're not, able to play on the PlayStation. So we made signs and we held a little mini protest about how it wasn't fair. And girls get to play the PlayStation 2. And then, so that's just one silly story. And the other thing is, for whatever reason, I'm thinking about my childhood home. There was a sign that said Sportsman. I think it's a company, perhaps. I'm not really sure. But I thought that was very unfair that it just said sports. I was like, where are the sports women? So with a Sharpie on the other side of the door, I wrote in big capital letters, sportswoman. And that was my sort of symbol of, gender equality and justice. But at any rate, I would say that those values are something that were instilled in me as a child, and just the ideas of fairness. And I think all children are very sensitive to what it means for things to be fair or unfair. But connecting the social justice aspect back to Judaism, my sort of Jewish journey has been very recent in a way. So, for example, I, about a year ago, took the Introduction to Judaism course at Temple Israel. And that was a course that I kind of fell in love with. I have friends that I still talk to today that I met in that course. And it was a really great rundown of Jewish values. We had a specific class that focused on the social justice aspect. And in that class, we talked about, what does tzedakah mean? What does it mean to have, 36 verses of, respecting and caring for the stranger, and, tzedek tirdof, and just really like having like a textual analysis of like ancient texts, and like trying to bring those back to how we live our everyday lives. And that's something that I fell in love with. And, at the time of recording, tomorrow is when I meet with the Beit Din, the rabbinic court, the three rabbis.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something that I'm really excited about. And that's sort of the tie, going from social justice to Judaism in like a very brief way, because I really could talk about how my journey started before the course. And, there's a question of what led you to the course, and taking the Introduction to Judaism, class at Temple Israel. And so, I'm trying to keep it short, but we can dive into it if you'd like.
No, I'd kind of like to, if that's not too personal. I don't, one of the things I love about Jew Folk as an organization and sort of the ethos behind it is we don't care really how you practice or what you practice or what you believe. That Jewish is Jewish, and I'm always interested in sort of hearing, as somebody who's born and raised Jewish, I'm always interested to talk to people and sort of hear the stories of people who are Jews by choice, for sort of the reasons that led them down that path. And so I guess I'm curious, if you're interested in answering that, what was there a tipping point? Was there a series of tipping points? I usually find that question is sometimes there's a real simple answer, and sometimes there's a way more complex answer.
I would definitely fall into the category of a very complex answer. But I will say that, this came at, this news came to light to me. I want to say like a few months into taking the classes at Temple Israel and working with my sponsoring rabbi. But I took a DNA test, and I was curious to know if I had any, because you can view Judaism as the religious aspect of it. You can view it as an ethnicity. You can view it as a culture, a blend of all of those things and more. But at any rate, I was very well studied at that point when it came to the religious aspects. And that's still something that drives me to this day. But I was like, do I have any DNA? Is that like a part of my history? And lo and behold, the answer is yes. The unfortunate part is that my parents and I have kind of a tenuous relationship, as I'm sure most people can relate to. So I have so many questions about, tell me more about my grandparents and my great grandparents, and, but that's something that, I'd like to perhaps heal my relationship with my parents first, and then sort of get the history sort of beyond just, me in Minnesota and my parents, emigrating from Ethiopia. But at any rate, that was kind of, I don't know, it felt affirming in a way. And so again, that's something where, I feel like as an individual person, have been making a series of choices, but I also feel like it's somehow in my DNA, or as I like to joke, my BNA, because that's my last name. Thank you. Yeah. But yeah, I just, gosh, I mean, if I'm trying to think about the series of choices, it was, we were in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic, and, at the height of George Floyd protests. And I sort of felt disconnected from community and disconnected from a higher being. I've always believed in something, greater than myself, than people. But that said, I was having a conversation with my girlfriend the other day about, are you an atheist? Are you agnostic? Are you gnostic? Are you a theist? And sort of that spectrum.
Yeah.
I feel like I've always hovered around the agnostic theist zone, perhaps. I think that, it's all belief for me. I can't go up to any person and say, no, I know 100% factually that there is a God. And I don't think most people can, but
and I think there are plenty of people who can, and that's okay. Like, that works for them.
Exactly. Yeah. This is all very personal to me.
Sure. Absolutely. And that's the thing. Religion is very personal. It's personal to everybody, and how people practice it, even in moments of public worship or public exaltation of religion. It's still very personal, even in the public sphere.
Exactly. So yeah, we were having this conversation, and I was talking about where I sort of land on that spectrum. But that said, I was at a point where I sort of felt disconnected, and it's funny because in hindsight, I realized that this book is for people who are Jewish, perhaps because they're, ethnic and cultural backgrounds. But I saw this book in the library by Edgar S. Bronfman, I believe is his name. And it was Why Be Jewish? And I was like, yeah, I've heard about Judaism. I grew up with people who were Jewish. Funny story. I was speaking with my best friend from high school, and she was saying that the high schoolers that we were with referred to themselves as the Jew crew, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that about you. That's an interesting way to refer to yourself. But anyway, so I pick up this book from the library, and I just remember the way this person spoke. He is a secular Jew, not a religious Jewish person, but really he underlined the values of Judaism, going back to our conversation about social justice and how we are obligated to care about one another. And, this idea of tikkun olam really spoke to me. And especially in a time where some people were really screaming, from their lungs, like, we have to care about other people. There are all of these issues. And at the same time, people were also saying, oh, it's time to sort of sweep this all under the rug and go back to normal, whatever their idea of normal meant. And so I don't know, it really spoke to me at a time that I needed it, and I've really enjoyed the practices that I've adopted into my life since. But those were sort of my immediate thoughts of social justice and Judaism and my Jewish journey. And you actually, to convert, you have to write a paper. At least in Minnesota, I believe that's the way it's done, or certainly at Temple Israel. But you write a spiritual autobiography, and in it you're meant to talk about, what is bringing you to the Jewish faith and sort of like the questions you're asking now. And you're given 2 to 4 pages to sort of, go into your journey. It was a challenging paper to write, and, yeah.
How do you limit that to 2 to 4 pages? That's insane.
And there are so many things to cover, your history, your practices, your sort of intentions for the future, and what you'd like to sort of carry on or dive into more deeply after the conversion, process.
Yeah.
As well as questions about, how are you giving back to your local Jewish community, to the Jewish community abroad? I don't know how I was able to write the paper, perhaps an act of God, I don't know. But I finished the paper, and I'm happy with the paper. So that's even another blessing.
That's right.
Normally,
that is fantastic. I mean, it really is it feels like that's the kind of paper that could either be a few paragraphs or like many, many volumes, depending on the person or how you want to tell it.
Yes, exactly. Perhaps in a few years, I'll go back and I'll expand on the paper, and it'll become a book or something. One of the aspects that I was able to cover in the paper, but not really dive into, and it's just something that fascinates me, are the practices of the Beta Israel community. These are the people who are from Ethiopia, who were disconnected from, after the temple's destruction, rabbinic Judaism and sort of like broader diaspora of Judaism. And, after certain operations like Operation Moses, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but basically It was, airlifting a lot of Ethiopians to the state of Israel. But at any rate, this community is something, since I am Ethiopian, I want to really learn more, just so much more. And I find that a lot of the resources that are in English, I'm sure if I were in Israel, it would be very easy to connect to somebody who is perhaps a kez, which is it's basically the Beta Israel version of a rabbi. But at any rate, the resources that are available in English tend to be things that are very academic, which is wonderful as somebody who loves to dive into academic texts and to read and to learn more. But what I am sort of desperately seeking at this point is, if I wanted to celebrate Passover, but with Ethiopian foods, what does that look like? Or, what does that mean? Or how do I sort of blend my Ethiopian identity with my Jewish identity? Recently, there was the celebration of Sigd. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Oh, okay, perfect. And so I listened to a talk about that. And I also know that it's a national holiday, I believe, in the state of Israel now. That I'm not sure when that was formally changed. But at any rate, there was this speaker who talked about her journey, going from Ethiopia to the state of Israel and how this holiday sort of changed through that journey. You know, it's a holiday that's all about wanting to be back in the land of Jerusalem, and then all of a sudden you're back in the land, and how fantastic is that, you know? But anyway, like, this is a very niche topic to me, perhaps, and could rant about it forever.
Well, I mean, I think it's maybe, you know, it might be niche to you, but you know, I'm interested to see who might listen to this who is also interested in, you know, either learning more or diving more into pieces like that. Because I don't think you're the only one to whom this is an important issue.
Well, to those who are listening, right now I'm reading this book by Wolf Leslau, not sure, but it's called Falasha Anthology, and it's the little subtitle is Translated from Ethiopic Sources. So if you're looking for a book to read, I think this was perhaps printed in the 1800s, so perhaps dated. No. Okay, sorry, I misspoke. Copyright 1951. So still old in a sense.
Yeah.
But
and if people read it, where can they, if they want to ask you questions or get into a conversation with you about it, how do they find you?
If anyone wants to reach out to me about this, please do. I'm very much encouraging this. You can reach me at Milo, Milo, at jewishcommunityaction.org. That's an email that you can use for questions about Ethiopian Judaism, and we can talk all about that if you'd like. Or if you just have general questions about comms at JCA or what JCA is up to, feel free to reach out there.
Well, Milo, I certainly hope people reach out to you, because I think there are lots of really interesting connections that people can make with you, whether it's over the book or whether the work at JCA, or if people just want to find out how to get involved in some of the coalition work that JCA is doing. Because I know from talking to many of the people that you've mentioned throughout our conversation who work at JCA, there's a lot of coalition work, and the work never stops.
Very true. Very true.
All right. Well, last couple questions, and we will let you get back to your day. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh my goodness. Okay. My immediate answer in my head was Shabbat, because it comes every week. You get to have a little bit of wine, or really in my household, grape juice. I love grape juice. I'm a kid at heart, perhaps.
No, that's nothing wrong with that.
But it's sort of on that thread, I also really like Purim, because you get to dress up. So again, kid at heart.
You are totally a kid at heart. There's no question.
Thank you.
What's your favorite Jewish food?
Ooh, great question. I would probably say there are so many. It's so hard to pick. Tying back to the Ethiopian discussion, I think that dabo, it's like, I would say probably the Ethiopian version of challah.
Okay.
You have it as part of Shabbat. Great food. So that's my answer. That is
excellent. Love that. We have not gotten that before, but I love when, you know, people, there are people who I've talked to who, you know, had lived in Israel for some or many years, and they ask, well, Jewish food or Israeli food? Because those are very different things. So I love when that question gets answered by people who bring in, you know, different, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, but, you know, foods or ideas that aren't necessarily mainstreamed in Judaism or in the American community. And I think that's really important, and I think that's really interesting. So thank you for bringing that in.
Well, thank you for the question. I love talking about food, so.
As do I. Well, Milo, thank you so much. We appreciate getting to meeting you, and best of luck as you continue to settle in. And I know this will have been out for almost a week by the time, but we hope the meeting with the Beit Din is a easy and successful one for you.
Thank you. I mean, I know the rabbis well, and I'm sure that they just want to hear more from me. Maybe I'll send this to them, like a week out, and they'll get to learn a little bit more too.
I hope so. Well, thank you very much, and again, best of luck with that, and looking forward to seeing you on the other side of this.
Thank you.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.